Harrison McKinley moved like the edge of a blade, sharp, cold, and impossible to catch off guard. He ran Novodyne's systems the same way he ran his life, efficiently, with no tolerance for weakness or wasted time. His schedule was stacked from sunrise to midnight, and even then, he often reviewed projections in his sleep. There were no casual lunches, no warm greetings in the hallway, and certainly no office parties. If something didn't serve the company's bottom line, it didn't exist. That was why the $7 billion problem made him feel physically sick. Novodyne's quantum processing infrastructure had become the backbone of half the Western Hemisphere's AI logistics systems. The bug wasn't just a glitch, it was a slow, invisible collapse in the code's long-term predictive stability. What looked flawless in a week-long simulation unraveled in the long run, skewing future calculations in small but devastating ways. Over the last quarter, projections had slipped by fractions that multiplied into billions. The board wanted answers. Investors were threatening to pull. Internally, his engineers were out of ideas, and whispers had started quiet, desperate conversations about sabotage, leaks, the possibility that the error wasn't a bug at all. Harrison trusted no one. He buried himself in data, pored over whiteboards, shut down entire departments trying to isolate the problem's source. Nothing made sense. It was as if a ghost had written the code. The office was a glass monolith towering over the city's financial district. At night, it emptied out fast, the quiet swallowing everything except the whir of servers and the soft buzz of security drones. That's when the cleaning crews came in. He hardly paid them any attention. Elisa Morales arrived each evening through the service elevator, moving quietly with her cart of supplies. She wore her dark hair tied back in a loose knot and kept her head down. On the first day, she nearly knocked over a display drone on the executive floor and apologized 3 times before slipping into the hallway. No one had remembered her name. No one asked where she was from. Harrison only noticed her once when she accidentally turned off one of the glass wall panels mid-wipe, triggering a system reset. He didn't say anything, just waved her away and reactivated the interface. She wasn't supposed to be in the executive suite after hours. But protocols had loosened lately with the company's internal chaos, and no one was tracking the cleaners like they should have been. It was nearly 11 p.m. when Harrison returned to grab a missing data log from his desk. He stepped off the private elevator onto his floor and paused in the dark. His office lights were still on. Inside, someone was moving around, soft footsteps, the scrape of a chair leg. He opened the door quietly. Elisa stood by his desk with a rag in one hand and a notepad in the other. Her cleaning cart sat a few feet away, abandoned. She wasn't cleaning. She was writing. At first, he thought it was a grocery list or idle doodling. But then he saw the symbols. His brain locked in mid-step. It wasn't random. Her handwriting was messy, but the structure was unmistakable: complex notation, predictive loops, system weight distributions. Equations related to the exact architecture that had been driving him insane for months. She didn't hear him. She was chewing the inside of her cheek, absorbed in the page, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the desk as if it steadied her. She muttered something under her breath and crossed out a line, replacing it with a notation he hadn't seen used in over a decade. He took another step forward. She jumped, turning quickly and dropping the pen. Sorry. I was just... She grabbed the rag and started wiping the desk in a panic. There was dust, and I wasn't trying to. He held up a hand. Where did you learn that? She froze. He moved past her and picked up the notepad, scanning the page. Part of him hoped he was imagining it. That she'd copied something from a whiteboard earlier, and was just mimicking shapes. But it wasn't a copy. It was original logic, flawed in places, unrefined, but bold. This is part of our quantum thread structure. I wasn't snooping, she said, her voice low. I just saw a pattern on the board earlier and thought about it all night. I didn't mean to. You wrote this? She didn't answer. He looked up, and she met his eyes just long enough for him to see it wasn't luck or mimicry. She understood the math. Not all of it, maybe, but enough to be dangerous. What's your background? I clean, she said quickly. That's not what I asked? She hesitated, then reached for the notepad. It's nothing. Just something I used to study. He didn't hand it back. Did you show this to anyone? No. I didn't think it mattered. He stared at her a moment longer, then folded the page, slipped it into his pocket, and nodded toward the door. You can go now. Her face twisted like she was about to explain or defend herself again, but she didn't. She grabbed the cart and left without a word. Harrison sat at his desk long after she was gone. He unfolded the page and studied it under the desk lamp. She'd spotted a threading bypass that restructured part of the flawed simulation. It wasn't a complete fix, but it was a door he hadn't seen. He ran her equation through his tablet's isolated system. A basic sim lit up. It held longer than anything the internal team had produced in the last 3 weeks. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't need to. Something had just shifted, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel cornered. She hadn't even known what she was solving. And somehow, that made it even more intriguing. Harrison didn't speak to Elisa the next few days. He didn't need to. She came and went at the usual times, cleaning in her quiet, distracted way, never once glancing in his direction. He wondered if she remembered what she wrote that night, or if the scribbles had been a one-time lapse of curiosity. Either way, she kept her distance, and he let her. He passed the folded page to his engineering lead during a meeting that Monday. No name attached, no explanation, just a clipped comment that an outside source had suggested a fresh approach to the system flaw. The lead, Kumar, gave the paper a cursory glance and let out a short laugh. This is a stretch. It's patchwork, half-finished logic, no proof of scalability. Run it anyway, Harrison said. Kumar shrugged and slid it aside. You really want dev time wasted on this? Do it on a test environment. Quietly. He didn't explain further. The meeting moved on. A few hours later, he got a message flagged urgent. Initial simulations based on the new structure extended the model stability window by 47%. No one had managed to nudge it beyond 3% before. Kumar didn't laugh after that. Harrison didn't call attention to it. He gave no credit, kept the equations buried in the system's back channels, and let the team believe it was just one more iteration in a long chain of attempts. But something had cracked open, and he knew exactly where the pressure had come from. He just didn't know how. Over the following week, he started watching Elisa differently. She moved through the building like a ghost, unnoticed by nearly everyone, but he saw the patterns. She lingered near the server rooms longer than necessary, humming softly as she dusted the racks. Not music, not a song, just a rhythmic string of sound like she was keeping time with a thought she didn't want to lose. Once, she paused at a whiteboard outside a development room, tilted her head, and used her sleeve to wipe away a cluster of equations. When she stepped back, the spacing had shifted, and the rebalanced formula now made visual sense. Harrison came by 2 minutes later and saw that the new structure actually resolved a parallel indexing error his team had been trying to visualize for days. She didn't know anyone had seen her. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. Another time, he found her in the back corridor of the analytics wing, scowling quietly at a model on a monitor left running by a junior developer. Her cart was halfway down the hall, abandoned. She didn't touch the keyboard, just stared for a full minute, muttering something about decay curves and redundancies before collecting herself and walking away. She wasn't guessing. She understood what she was seeing. He did some digging. Her name turned up as part of a dormant university registration from years ago, theoretical physics major, dropout in her 3rd year. No degree. No paper trail after that. The trail cut off right around the time of her mother's death, which he found mentioned in an old obituary out of state. No employment records, no graduate program follow-ups. Just a string of inconsistent jobs, most under the table, the kind that paid fast and ended quietly. There was also a younger brother. 14. Enrolled in a local charter school under her emergency contact. Harrison paused on that detail longer than he expected. He kept the information to himself. Instead of confronting her or dragging her into meetings she hadn't agreed to, he tried something smaller. The next Friday morning, he intercepted her near the executive pantry just before her shift ended. "Join me for coffee," he said. She blinked like she hadn't heard him properly. I have to finish the East Corridor. I'll have someone else cover it." She didn't move, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "It's just coffee," he added. Still, she hesitated. Then she nodded. They sat in the corner office lounge where he usually hosted high-profile guests. Elisa perched on the edge of the chair like she was waiting to be dismissed before anything started. Harrison poured 2 cups himself, which she seemed to find even more unsettling. "You're curious about our models," he said without preamble. "I don't know what you mean." He leaned back, watching her fingers curl around the cup, white-knuckled. "You've paused to study them. I've seen it. I'm not accusing you. Just curious." She exhaled slowly. "I used to study similar things. Before." "Before what?" "Life. Family. Bills." She took a cautious sip and didn't look at him. "I'm not trying to get in trouble. I like this job. It's quiet. No one expects much from me. That's unfortunate." She raised an eyebrow. "That no one expects anything," he clarified. "Clearly they should." The silence stretched. Then she surprised him. "That diagram near the analytics lab, it won't hold. Too symmetrical. Real-world entropy would tear it apart in phase 2. Harrison didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. She realized what she'd said and flinched, as if she just shouted in a library. "Sorry. You're not wrong." He let her finish her coffee and didn't push her further. She left quickly, looking back once before the door shut behind her. Over the next 2 weeks, he started including her in brief interactions, an offhand question about a visual model, a comment about system tension. She never offered much, but when she did, it was sharp. Accurate. She pointed out a fault in a predictive curve that none of the engineers had caught, noting it reminded her of how a pendulum eventually betrays the clock it serves. He didn't even know what that meant until he mapped it to the timeline drop-off in their latest projection. Their conversations never lasted more than a minute or 2. But they were real. And they left him thinking in ways he hadn't in years. The board, meanwhile, was growing restless. The patch in the system had bought them time, but not clarity. They wanted a name behind the fix. When Harrison gave none, they turned their frustration toward him. A faction had started to form, led by the same members who'd once tried to lure away Novodyne's original dev team. Their solution was straightforward: bring in a new CTO, someone with proven results and a loud enough reputation to reset public trust. The name floated most was Don Keller, an opportunist with a talent for self-promotion and a history of corporate cannibalism. He tried to poach Novodyne's team 2 years prior, and only failed because Harrison outbid him by tripling a lead engineer's stock options. Keller had already contacted the board with a proposal. They were listening. Rumors started filtering down through the company, whispers that Harrison was slipping, that he'd lost his edge, that he'd stopped trusting his own people and started relying on outside contractors. One anonymous memo even suggested he'd sabotaged the infrastructure himself to create the illusion of a breakthrough later. No one said it aloud, but they didn't need to. Harrison felt the shift. Not directly, not yet. But the floor beneath him wasn't solid anymore. He watched Elisa walk past his office that evening, humming faintly under her breath, head down, arms full of replacement filters. She didn't glance his way. She probably never assumed she'd changed anything. But she had. And soon, he would have to decide what to do with the knowledge she didn't yet know he had. Harrison waited until the last possible moment. For weeks, he had been circling the truth, holding it like a live wire in his hand, not quite sure when to let it touch ground. But the cracks were spreading fast, within the code base, the company, and the trust the board had in him. Novodyne's infrastructure was finally stabilizing, the simulations holding longer than anyone predicted, and their quantum projections had ticked back into green for the first time all quarter. But it wasn't his doing, and it wasn't his team's. They just cleaned up the edges. The spark had come from someone with no access badge, no title, no degree. He caught her just as she was finishing her shift. Elisa was wiping down the glass wall outside the operations lab when he stepped into the hallway. She gave a polite nod, expecting him to pass like usual, but he stopped instead. "I need a word." She froze with her rag halfway across the panel. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said, though the weight in his voice said otherwise. "Not yet." He motioned for her to follow him, and to his surprise, she did, without a fight. He led her to one of the unused conference rooms and shut the door. No whiteboards, no windows. Just a table and 2 chairs. "I've known for a while," he said, "that the equations, the insight, it came from you." She didn't sit. She stood near the door, arms crossed like she might bolt any second. "I didn't mean to interfere," she said quickly. "If it caused a problem, you helped us stabilize the system." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in the way she held her shoulders. He took a breath. "I gave your notes to my team. I didn't use your name, but I passed them off as something from a consultant. They worked. We're weeks ahead because of you." She stared at him like he just confessed to a theft, and maybe he had. "I didn't want to scare you off," he added. "But I need your help now. There's one last piece of the fix no one can crack, and you should have asked me," she said sharply. "I know. You stood there and watched me work in secret, then took it without even asking if I wanted to be involved. I thought I was protecting you. From what? Credit?" Her voice broke just enough to expose the edge beneath it. "From the risk of being seen as someone who knows what they're doing even without a degree? You didn't protect me. You used me because it was convenient." He didn't deny it. He couldn't. "I was trying to give you space to decide," he said quietly. "You already decided for me." She stepped back like the air between them had turned poisonous. "You're just like the others. You saw something useful and took it. That's all this was." Elisa, no. She was already moving. Out the door, past the rows of glass offices, the ones she never even looked into before. Her name didn't exist in the system, and she wasn't going to wait around to see how they spun her into it. Harrison didn't follow. He stood in the empty conference room and listened to the sound of her cart rolling down the hallway for the last time. She didn't come back the next day. Or the next. Her shift was quietly reassigned, and her badge deactivated. No one asked questions. She'd made herself invisible for so long that her absence barely registered. The board meeting arrived 3 days later, and Harrison walked in with a full report, a working prototype, and no intention of hiding where the breakthrough came from. He didn't say her name, but he made it clear the solution came from outside the official structure. An unaffiliated party. No degree, no clearance, no formal employment. But a mind that saw what no one else had. They stared at him like he'd lost it. "An anonymous consultant?" one of the directors repeated, leaning back in her chair. "It doesn't matter where the answer came from," Harrison said. "What matters is that it works. We're projecting positive balance within the fiscal year." Another member, Rudd, folded his hands and smiled like a parent humoring a child. "And you expect us to accept that without knowing who this mystery savior is? You've seen the numbers. That's all you need." "On the contrary," Rudd said. "If this ghost in the system is as valuable as you claim, then we should bring them in. Offer a buyout. Ownership. Lock them down before anyone else does." "No." Harrison's tone was final. "She's not for sale." The room went still. There was a pause, just long enough for the message to land. Then they moved on, tension simmering under the surface. But Rudd wasn't done. Later that evening, a leak hit the press. Not a flashy headline. Just a quiet scoop buried in a tech blog, tracing the origin of the Novodyne stabilization code back to an unauthorized non-employee on the janitorial staff. By morning, it had spread like wildfire. Some framed it as a joke, CO takes advice from cleaning crew. Others saw it for what it was and began digging. They found her name, old photos from university forums, partial academic transcripts, even a GoFundMe page from years ago, when her mother had been in hospice. They painted a picture of brilliance buried under bad luck, of talent wasted by circumstance. But it didn't matter how flattering the narrative was. She wasn't ready for any of it. The cameras found her apartment within a day. They waited outside, swarming the sidewalk, calling her name. When she didn't answer, they tried neighbors. Then they started knocking on the school where her brother was enrolled. Harrison tried to reach her. No answer. No trace. She was gone. By the end of the week, Novodyne's public image was in chaos. The company's stock fluctuated wildly. Some accused Harrison of misleading shareholders. Others hailed him for discovering unconventional talent. The board was split. Rudd, emboldened by the leak, pushed harder for the new CTO appointment, claiming Harrison had risked the company's reputation chasing ghostwriters. Harrison stopped responding to interview requests. He shut down all media appearances, ignored external pressure, and focused on one thing: stabilizing the system with the structure Elisa had hinted at. But he couldn't concentrate. The simulations no longer held meaning without her voice in the margins. The white boards in his office remained untouched. The coffee cups sat clean and unused. He kept thinking about what she'd said. That he decided for her. And she was right. It took Harrison 2 weeks to find her. Not through the usual channels. Elisa had shut down everything that connected her to the city. Her phone was off. Her email accounts locked. She'd pulled her brother from school and vanished so quietly it made him realize how little he truly knew about her life. It wasn't until he checked the background file again, combing through every detail, that he remembered a throwaway mention, her grandmother's name, tucked into an old emergency contact form from years ago. Rural county, 4 hours out of the city. A place with more trees than cell towers and one general store that sold everything from fishing gear to milk. The road there was steep and badly paved. His car bottomed out twice, and the GPS gave up halfway through, but he kept going. By the time he reached the small cabin tucked back in the woods, he wasn't sure what he expected, maybe anger, maybe silence. What he found was a girl no one should have had to hide. She answered the door with a frown that vanished into disbelief when she saw him. Her brother appeared behind her a moment later, eyes wide, holding a book in one hand and a half-eaten slice of toast in the other. Harrison said nothing at first. He waited until she stepped aside, wordlessly letting him in. The inside of the cabin was warm but sparse. No signal, no screens, just shelves lined with old paperbacks, hand-sewn curtains, and a small fire burning in the stove. Elisa sat across from him, arms folded tightly across her chest, legs curled under her like she was trying to make herself smaller. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know. Reporters followed us for days. My brother was terrified. They called me a fraud and a genius in the same sentence. I'm sorry." She looked away. "They weren't all wrong." Harrison leaned forward. "You didn't do anything wrong. You just didn't expect to be seen." Her face didn't soften, but she didn't send him away either. "I came to say something," he said, "and I'm not good at this part. But I'm going to try." She said nothing. "I've built my entire career on being the person who saw everything first. Who outthought everyone in the room. When you wrote those equations, and I realized what they were, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, panic. Not because it threatened my work. Because it threatened who I thought I was." She didn't interrupt. "I took your work. I buried your name. I told myself I was protecting you, but the truth is, I didn't know how to make room for someone who didn't fit into my version of how genius should look." For a moment, the only sound was the fire crackling behind them. "I don't want to offer you a job," he continued. "You deserve more than that. You deserve space. Ownership. Real ground to build something that matters. With me, not under me. She blinked, caught off guard by that last part. You helped fix a billion-dollar problem. But I think you can help build something even better. Her brother, still watching from the doorway, tilted his head and asked quietly, Are you the guy from the TV? Harrison smiled without looking away from Elisa. Not if I can help it. They sat there for a while, the conversation unfinished but no longer broken. When he finally stood to leave, she followed him to the door. She didn't promise anything. But she didn't tell him not to hope. 3 months later, Novodyne announced a sweeping reorganization of its innovation division. The press release included a new leadership appointment, Elisa Morales, co-director of Innovation and Systems Architecture. No fancy bio. No soft focus photo shoot. Just a name beside a title and a portfolio of patents that bore her signature. She returned to the building through the front entrance, not the service elevator. The lobby was still flanked by screens running performance metrics, but now one of them displayed a rotating schematic of the quantum chip model she'd helped redesign. Her brother walked beside her that morning, too old to be holding her hand but still doing it anyway, carrying a miniature replica of the chip in a clear plastic case like it was made of gold. In the weeks following her return, the company stabilized. The board stopped circling like vultures. Rudd tried to stir up more controversy but found himself sidelined when the numbers kept climbing and investor confidence soared. No one wanted to hear complaints when revenue projections exceeded targets and global licensing deals flooded in. Harrison's position was secured with a quiet board vote. He didn't gloat. He didn't have to. Elisa set up her own lab on the 3rd floor, outfitted with custom equipment and a door that only opened with her personal clearance. She recruited a small team, brilliant, under-recognized people from non-traditional backgrounds, most of whom had been passed over by other companies for lacking pedigree. She designed a rotating mentorship program for girls in local public schools, quietly funded out of her own equity. The next time she walked into the boardroom, it was mid-quarter review. She wore a fitted blazer over a plain blouse and jeans, no makeup, no script. She presented 5 slides, each one cleaner and more impactful than anything the board had seen in years. No one interrupted her. No one dared. Harrison sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, not hiding the small smile tugging at his mouth. When the meeting ended, and they stepped out into the hallway, she gave him a sidelong look. You still don't drink office coffee, she said. I do now. We upgraded the beans. That's because I made you fire the vendor. And yet somehow I'm still in charge. Only technically, she said. They didn't say anything for a while after that. Just walked slowly down the hallway together, past glass panels now filled with new equations and ideas scribbled in a dozen different handwritings. Outside the window, the city moved as it always had, unaware of how close it had come to losing the thing that saved it. Harrison glanced at her just once before they reached the elevator. You're not just a partner in this company, he said. You're the reason it's still standing. She didn't argue. They stepped inside, side by side, and let the doors close without another word. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like, it really helps out the channel. And if you want more heartwarming and emotional stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this one. I'd love to hear your reactions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.